Okay, so this is something that I've been asked by numerous people to comment on. I'm a couple of weeks late. I apologise for that. That's just the circumstances, really. But I want to talk about this thing which came into the news on the 21st of August, hit the headlines on the 21st of August, where the Chief Commissioner, the female Chief Commissioner of the London Fire Brigade, Dany Cotton, criticised the ITV2 programme Love Island for the way that it had portrayed firefighters, for portraying them in a sexist manner, an objectifying manner, and I suppose you could say a sexually, professionally stereotyping manner. By what had happened, as I understand it, the programme had asked the male contestants, required the male contestants to dress in, I suppose, what you would say is a sexualised representation of a firefighter. Okay, so it's this ground that we've been on 1,000 times before, that has been criticised 1,000 times before, where you have an occupation that is predominantly of one gender being represented in a sexualised form, and that is something nowadays that appears to be seen very much as a no-no. And I've been asked to comment on that. So that's what I intend to do. What I will say is that every other time that I've seen it criticised, it's always been women that are being sexualised. The claim is that they're being sexualised, that they're being sexually objectified, that they are being professionally stereotyped in this manner. And the conversation is centred on women, as you would expect, right? If they are the ones that are being stereotyped and objectified, then that is where the issue lies, and that is what we should be talking about. The thing that sprung to mind with me immediately that I read about this, I followed the links that people had sent me, was that Dany Cotton did not go down those lines. So let me read out the statement that Dany Cotton had made. This is from the Metro website. When popular shows like Love Island roll out every offensive cliche possible, that's a pretty big claim, with their so-called fireman challenge, it reinforces the misconception that all firefighters are muscle-bound men. So what I would have expected at that point was for her to defend the 94% of her operational employees who are male, right? Because they are the ones that are being objectified, that are being treated in a sexist manner. They are the ones who are being professionally stereotyped. Instead, her port of call was this line: no wonder so many young women are put off by that. And that was the bit that I found a little bit hard to swallow, really. That on every other eventuality where somebody claims that sexism is involved and that women are getting treated in a sexist manner, then that is the problem. But seemingly when men are being treated in a sexist manner, being objectified and being professionally stereotyped, the problem is somewhere perhaps some women may be negatively affected by it. And that Dany Cotton, rather than choosing to defend the 94% of her own employees who are male, she's chosen instead to defend some people who are not even her own employees and who might be tangentially affected by this portrayal. And my immediate reaction was, how would this play out if this was the other way round? Imagine in the field of nursing, and I bring this up because I made a video on Dany Cotton and her treatment of the Fireman Sam some months ago, where she claimed that the fact that the programme Fireman Sam, that otherwise uses the gender neutral terms of firefighter and other roles within the fire service, uses the term fireman for the central character, clearly for reasons of the decades ago when the programme first started. She took issue with that, and I pointed out the fact that by rights, if the gender asymmetry in the fire service is a problem, then the gender asymmetry in nursing, which is of a similar scale, ought to be 10 times the problem, because there are 10 times as many registered nurses in the United Kingdom as there are professional firefighters. So we should be 10 times more concerned with that, because it's 10 times a bigger job market. And yet within that field, within the NHS themselves, they still refer to female staff and charge nurses as sisters and matrons. They're still using gendered terms to this day in the fucking NHS, 30 years after the term fireman disappeared because we needed gender neutral terms, and there doesn't seem to be any equivalent to Dany Cotton within the field of nursing, desperately clutching at their pearls and worried about that particular issue. Nobody gives a fuck because seemingly it's men that are underrepresented in nursing and not women. That was the point that I made at the time. And I want to touch on the nursing thing again, because you imagine if a male boss within the NHS or a man high up within the Royal College of Nursing was to comment if Love Island had a nurses challenge, right, where the female contestants were dressed up as a sexualised representation of nursing, and he'd said this is horrific, every horrific cliche of nursing, sexist cliche of nursing was involved in this. My concern is it might put men off joining nursing. He'd get hauled over the fucking coals for that, wouldn't he? He'd get called a misogynist. This would be a perfect example of patriarchal society, that even when women are on the receiving end, they're getting the sexist portrayals, they're being objectified in a professional fucking role. All this twat can give a shit about is how this is going to impact upon men. And yet this is exactly what Dany Cotton did with this statement, and nobody gives a crap about it. And I can only assume that really it's because this whole business of this equality agenda doesn't seem to live up to its own billing, does it? The one thing you would expect from an equality agenda is that it would try and apply itself equally, for fuck's sake, but it seems it only cares, the equality agenda only applies when it's the right way round. It's only of interest to us when it's women that are getting the raw deal, when it's the other way round, when men are getting the raw deal, where they're getting the apparent raw deal, the asymmetry, when they're underrepresented, when they're being treated in a sexist manner. And the thing is, for me, I am quite certain that Dany Cotton is a good person, right? And that she is an ardent advocate of gender equality, and she just wants to make the world a better place and give women who are growing up in London a chance to aspire to be firefighters, and that's a marvellous thing. But it's almost as if, although she can see the prejudices within society and beyond, she can't see her own internal prejudices that are so great that when 94% of her own workforce, by her own words, are being treated in a sexist and cliched manner, she's still more interested in people who aren't even her fucking employees, in case it may have impacted on them because they share the same gender as her. They share the agenda that she has, the equality agenda, which only points in one direction. It really does always seem the most staggering coincidence to me that these employees, these top brass, that just all they're concerned about, all they're bothered about is equality. It's just equality. And honestly, Gov, it wouldn't matter which way round it was, right? If it was men who were being underrepresented, then that I'd be just as interested in it, right? These kinds of people always seem to end up employed in businesses where it's women who are underrepresented, and never seem to be employed in businesses where it's men who are underrepresented. It's just such a staggering coincidence, that, isn't it? It's almost as if people aren't being quite honest, and maybe it's just political pressure that's involved, and really these people aren't quite as even-handed, perhaps, as either they portray themselves to be, or maybe even as much as they think themselves to be. Now, something else that I really wanted to touch upon, because by pure happenstance, fortune, this must have been commissioned at the same time. I think it was pure fluke that at the same kind of time the Mayor of London had commissioned YouGov to conduct some research into women's attitudes towards various different roles, and these were reported in the same articles. And apparently there was some consternation because 25% of women didn't think that women are as well equipped to be firefighters as men are. And I think the question was worded something along the lines of, do you think that men are more able to do the job, women are more able to do the job, or are they both equally able. And that was seen as concerning, that a quarter of women didn't regard women as equally able. And that really surprised me, that, because surely technically that is the right answer to give, isn't it? I mean, after all, the role of a lot of this video that I'm making here is an opinion piece. It's my opinions discussing the opinions of other people, organisations and individuals. But let's talk about some objective facts. And the objective facts are there is a physical requirement to be a firefighter. There are physical tests, and they will test your cardiovascular capacity, they will test your strength endurance, they will test your strength. That is an objective fact that those things take place. It is also an objective physiological fact that at all those three things, that on average, men outperform women. This is why, this is not a controversial thing to say, this is why we have separate women's events at the Olympics to men's events, because otherwise women would just get crowded out, because the average male performance and the elite male performance are higher than that for women. There are physiological differences, folks. I don't think that is it might be a controversial fact nowadays, but that's because society's become so fucked up. We all ought to be shooting ourselves in the fucking face, but it's an incontrovertible fact. It is incontrovertibly true. And so what that means is, how do you address this question? This question, do you think men are more able, women are more able, or they are both equally able? Well, it doesn't say on average, but you have to assume it means on average, because if it doesn't, what does it mean? If you assume, obviously a woman who is more able than a man is less able is more able. A woman that is less able than a more able man is less able. So you can't look at it on an individual level, because it's nonsensical. You don't know which man you're comparing to which fucking woman, do you? So the only way that you can address that question, if you want to answer it correctly, technically correctly, is in terms of averages. And it is again an objective fact that if you take 100 working age men and 100 working age women at random and you put them into the fire service entry tests of any brigade in the country, a greater percentage of the male applicants will get through those tests than female applicants. So there is no way round it that on average men are more able to do that than women. In no way does that preclude, in no way is that you saying that women should not be firefighters, that women cannot be firefighters, that those women that are firefighters and have the capabilities for being firefighters are not awesome firefighters, and that women shouldn't give it a go if they have the capabilities. It's just answering the fucking question. And this is really not a trivial point if you're thinking that it is, because we do have a situation at the moment where fire service have a series of physical tests, and a lower proportion of female applicants get through those physical tests than male applicants. But think on this, right? Think on this. If we really are to believe that women are just as capable on average of being firefighters as men, then there is absolutely no justification for a lower percentage of women getting through those physical tests than men. Ergo, any test whereby a lower percentage of women get through those tests than men it would fall foul of the Equality Act 2010. It is sexual discrimination. And I'm afraid it's a physiological fact that any test that you have that taxes your cardiovascular capacity, strength, endurance, or strength is going to give you more male applicants going through those tests than women. Ergo, if you accept this mantra that women are just as capable as men, you can have no physical tests as an entry to the fire service whatsoever, because if you do, they are discriminatory, because more men will get through those tests than women, which is suggesting that men are more capable of being firefighters on average than women. Can you see the stupid rabbit hole we are heading down there? I don't think anybody wants to head down that rabbit hole, right? So why can't we have a sensible conversation about this? It seems to me my concern is not with the 25% of those who said yes, men are more capable than women in that regard. It's the 75% who didn't, because either they haven't thought the question through, they're just fucking plain ignorant, quite honestly, they have a prejudiced agenda of their own, or perhaps, let's be a little bit more charitable, perhaps what they did do is what some people do with these questionnaires when they get a question that's really badly worded, that doesn't really make sense. You know why they're asking you that question. You know what they're going to do with the result. You know what their agenda is. You know what they're trying to find out. So rather than answer the question that they asked, you try and do their work for them and answer the question that they intended to ask and give them the question that they think will be the right answer, even if objectively it's the fucking wrong answer. But what that ends up doing is that you end up giving an objectively wrong answer to that question. And I don't think you could have a more objectively wrong. We have all the physiological fucking data, so we know statistically what percentage of each group can get through those tests, so we know statistically what the capabilities of those different groups, the group man and the group woman, is capable of in terms of getting through those tests. What we don't need, folks, is to try and fool young women into thinking either that there is no physical aspect to firefighting or that there is no statistical average difference between men and women. What we need to do is to try and alter young women's perceptions to view the occupation as firefighting as something which is absolutely viable and normal as a career choice to anyone who has the desire and the capabilities. It may well be that a greater percentage of men have the desire. It may well be that a greater percentage of men have the capabilities. That shouldn't matter, folks. The important thing is that on the individual level, everybody feels enabled to follow their passions if they have the capabilities to follow their passions. And yes, absolutely, in the same way and to the same degree, the same also ought to hold true of young men and the career of nursing. Yet, of course, you will note there is not one single Dany Cotton trying to challenge that discrepancy. No government pressure to address that gender imbalance. No YouGov polls commissioned by mayors of London into that particular problem. No outrage that the terms matron and sister are still used today, 30 years after the gender-neutral term firefighter replaced fireman. But I'm afraid, folks, whether you like it or not, that is the reality of the equality agenda. An equality agenda that doesn't even take the first steps at trying to be even-handed. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Interested to know what you think in comments. Thank you for watching this video, and bye.